On the agenda tonight, we're going back to 1969. We're going to be taking a look at Fleetwood Mac, and they're going to be performing Oh Well. Hello, Phil here from Wings of Pegasus, and welcome to another analysis video. If you enjoy this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe. So, we're taking a look at some early Fleetwood Mac here with Peter Green and Danny Kirwan on guitars. So let's get them up on screen, and we'll watch this the whole way through, and then get into the analysis after.
We're now going to do our latest single called Oh Well. About the shape I'm in, I can't sing, I ain't pretty, and my legs are thin. But don't ask me what I think of you, I might not give the answer that you want me to. Now when I talked to God, I knew he'd understand. He said, stick by me and I'll be your guiding hand. But don't ask me what I think of you, I might not give the answer that you want me to.
And there we have it, and the crowd goes mild, as you can see from the footage. But that song, the way that it's been put together, when I first heard Oh Well, it's one of those that takes you by surprise because of the fact that in the verses, everything drops out. And also we get into the lead guitar section as well, where everything comes in dynamically. But there's so many interesting things going on within the composition, and it's only just over 2 minutes in length here with this live performance. And also we can add in the fact that we get Danny and also Peter with their harmonizing lines on the guitar. So there's plenty that is going to spark your interest. We're going to jump straight in with the guitar because this is one of those riffs that I think everybody learns when they're learning to play the guitar, and it's great practice for hammer-ons and pull-offs because that is what's going on our second fret on the A string and D string, and also the third fret of our low E string. The other thing to point out here is that we've got not only Peter playing the riff, but we've also got Danny who's playing a lot of the lead here. And this is the thing that most of the work that Peter's playing underneath, obviously he's playing the harmony lead part, but he's also playing this rhythm where he's leaving the low E string nice and open in order to get the octave E and then strum through it to keep that rhythm moving forward. So with the riff, we have a definite question, response, question, and then answer. And starting out from the beginning, like that. That was the first question. I started to play a little bit of the first response there as well. But when we get into that first question, an important part about the playing is to have these 3 upstrokes at the end of the phrase. So we have... You can hear all of those upstrokes, and you'll be able to see that when Peter's playing it. But then we have the response to that, which is... And you can see the way that I'm playing it, the same way as Peter's playing it in this performance. We've got the first finger barring the 2nd fret. And just keeping that 2nd finger on for that 2nd time through. First time, like that, and then down, up, up, like that, in order to, again, fill out that sound. So that response that we had, we go slightly up in pitch, and that's why it sounds like a response when compared to... Just by taking it up a little bit further, it's now a response to that first question. And we have another question after that, which is exactly the same thing. So by the time we get to the 4th time through, we've got... like that. So we've got more notes being involved here, and it'll make it sound more like an answer than just a response because of those extra notes. If we're relating it to language, it's like explaining something in a little bit more detail. So we have that right at the end. So altogether we've got... like that. And then at that point, Peter's going to break off into this octave E that we have on the 7th fret of our A string, whilst hitting this low E string. So we're getting a nice full sound, and it's that kind of sound hitting that low E string with the octave of the E, and also applying a little bit of a hammer-on from the 5th fret, which you play with your 1st finger, onto that 7th fret. Like that. And this is all happening underneath the lead that's coming in from Danny. So then focusing the attention on Danny's guitar here, Danny Kirwan, because when he's throwing this together, he's applying quite a lot of attitude and approaching the playing with more of a loose feel than being... and just playing it straight notes. He's getting a lot of percussive sound from the other strings. Like that. And also applying that vibrato. It's an aggressive vibrato that he throws in there. And it does change in frequency as we progress through the song. But certainly in this section, he gets quite a wobble on that 9th fret. When he throws it together. And you can see there with my technique, you want to be quite wild with that right hand, but try and mute the other strings if you can. You might hear them occasionally ring out in the background like that. It's really subtle when you do hear another string, but you can be a little bit wild with that right hand if you want to. That kind of thing. And all of that percussive striking of the strings is just going to put that attitude in there. Another thing that's probably getting thrown in there by Peter as well on the rhythm is jumping up to the 5th fret of the D. So we get this like that. It's subtle, and again, you want to play this with a bit of attitude in that right hand. So that you might hear a string or two ringing out. This is all going to be in E minor. So if you do hit those like there, for example, you can hear that G ringing out, maybe a bit of that B string as well, but that's all part of your E minor chord. So it isn't going to be a deal breaker if you do accidentally hit those. It's just going to fill out that sound a little bit more, and you want the attitude in the performance here. You don't want to be playing it like that. And then as we progress into the main solo in terms of everything being open dynamically, we get into our unison bends. and a faster vibrato, as you could hear there, just speeding it up to introduce more energy into the sound, and that's what we have here from Danny. And also playing those unison bends again. We're in the old faithful pentatonic shape 1 here, 12th fret of your guitar, and that's where you're going to be playing this through the same shape that I've shown many times on this channel. But when we get into this faster vibrato, there's a little line down here as well, and also the same approach of actually doing a pre-bend. So we're bending up to our destination first and then applying the vibrato at that point. Again, it's a really fast vibrato, so if you do want to implement that same energy, you'll have to speed it up a little bit in order to achieve that. But this bend first, we're not going and then getting up there. We're already starting at our end destination, and then make sure that you don't pick it on the way up. Bend, and then pick, and you'll be fine. If you are playing this with a guitar that has a fixed bridge, then you'll be fine, because that first finger is going to stay consistent even when you bend up the B string to meet that same note. Whereas if you haven't got a fixed bridge and it's floating, it means that when you do the bend, you're going to be increasing the tension on that one string, and that takes tension out of the other strings, and you'll be able to see the bridge does move up ever so slightly because of the increase in tension, which means that your first finger here, our E, would start to go a little bit flat the further we bend the note on the B string. So that is something to look out for, that you might have to just bend your first finger a little bit to keep the pitch nice and consistent between those two notes if your bridge is starting to raise up a little bit and it's not fixed. Another thing to point out about the performance is at 2 minutes and 17, you'll see Peter playing through the riff, and he's got a tone that is similar to this in that he's rolled off the gain and the overdrive sound on his guitar. So it means that by the time he plays through, he then comes down to his guitar in order for the rhythm now to be fuller, and you'll be able to see that obviously it happens in a split second because he quickly moves down to really open the taps on the rhythm sound. It is something that you can get used to, controlling your tone on your guitar by just rolling off some of that gain and overdrive sound by decreasing your volume. And you can get good at it, so you can just roll it maybe a quarter or a half down, so you're 5 out of 10 on your guitar volume wise, and you'll get that more of a crunchy, thinner sound than when you open the taps. And you can start to play around with that, but that's exactly what Peter does here. I want to revisit something that I said when I was demonstrating the riff about the call and response, and also the answer we get right at the end with the riff is something that a lot of musicians have the ability to use music as a language, and so many of the top musicians throughout time haven't had the ability to read or write music, but they could write a great song, they could write a great melody and a great riff. And that, for me, is all about talking the language of music in exactly the same way that I can be talking to you here and use lots of really long words that I might not even know how to write or how to spell, but I can communicate what is in my head to you and you can understand it. You don't need me to write it down in order for that message to get through and to get across to multiple people in a room, if there were many of you listening to me. It is interesting sometimes how music works as a language. You might have some people who are great at theory and writing everything down, and when you say, well, just come up with something, and they'll say, well, where's the sheet music, and I'll be able to play it. It's getting across that idea of being creative and not having those shackles of theory and having to work it all out first so that you can play it, just play it first and then people can write it down afterwards. There are so many great artists that can just speak the language of music and don't have that theoretical knowledge. So it is a really interesting composition the whole way through. The way that it's been put together with the intro riff, which is a hook just in itself, the way that we break down totally into the verse to just have Peter's vocal, and that is it. And just on that vocal, again, having the ability to play and sing at the same time, and having a quality vocal to the point where it can just be silence and just the voice, and Peter's voice can still sell you that song and sell you that melody because it's so well delivered. It is interesting when you look out for that, the final verse, you can tell that they have rehearsed it in order to have a sudden cutoff, but it's something that I think Peter wasn't really expecting it to be so sudden, because he's laughing during that final verse and he just laughs openly by the end of that verse. But this is what happens live sometimes, especially with a new song, because as Peter said, this was their new song, their new single, Oh Well, and it would have been an early performance of it, but it's great to see these little parts where you can tell that the band aren't that rehearsed and something happens live that might throw other bands off. But obviously these guys are professionals, so they're used to it, but Peter can't help but laugh a little bit just because of how abrupt that ending was. And also maybe the way that the maracas come in as well is a little bit more lighthearted, so he probably found that a bit funny as well. Also, I love the way that Danny actually got into the band, because Peter was looking for another guitarist in order to help him maybe with some of the writing and lighten the load a bit. And he auditioned 300, around that amount of guitarists, and he couldn't find anybody that was going to fit the bill. And Danny, when they were setting up as Fleetwood Mac and Peter would set up, Danny would get there early. He'd always be in the front row. He was a huge fan of Peter's playing, and he would help them lift the gear in. And they found out that actually the guy we're looking for is Danny, the guy who's helping us move our kit around before the gigs. Also, he used to jam with Peter after the gigs. So it was something that when he did get in the band, he was just overjoyed and astonished, I think the word was used to describe his reaction, because he was a massive fan of the sound in the first place and then had the opportunity to play with Fleetwood Mac. When Peter would write lead lines, it's having somebody of the ability level where they can play what you're asking them to play. And that is something that Peter said about Albatross, which was a massive hit. He said that that would never have been a hit without Danny's playing with the harmony lines that went into that song, because that is so much about feel and expression. And it just so happened that Peter found Danny, and Danny just happened to be standing right at the front of the stage, a guy that could play exactly how was needed for a particular song, a particular feel, and had all of that control of all of his techniques. Vibrato is a major one that Danny had in there, and that is something that Peter was drawn to when he heard Danny first play. As it would turn out, just a year after this performance is when Peter Green left Fleetwood Mac. He did return for a brief reunion in 1971, but unfortunately this setup and this sound of Fleetwood Mac didn't last very long. As we know, it did change in future years. But thank you guys so much for suggesting this video for me to take a look at, and keep those suggestions coming in the comments below. Let me know what you guys think, and if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe. And I'll see you guys at the next one. Rock!